Welcome to Tracy Mommy Reads. I am back again with another video. Today, I'm going to be talking about the book Our Perfect Storm by Carley Fortune. Our Perfect Storm. And this is actually my first time reading a book by Carley Fortune. Now I feel like I want to go down a rabbit hole because I see a lot of her books that people talk about. And I had never read any of them. And again, I got this from the book of the month. And I want to just take a sidebar here and say, when I think about, like, when I go on Instagram and I'm looking through people's carousels or, I see their videos and, they're putting out content about, the top thriller books that they read, the top romance or the best books that they've read this year or whatever. And even without a lot of them having this identifying marker, I'm noticing that so many of the books are books that were featured in the Book of the Month Club. And I don't know, I feel a certain kind of way about that. I mean, I get that those books are probably the most popular because they probably have a lot of people buying those books and reading those books. And obviously the books have to be good for, or at least very entertaining for people to talk about them. Some of them I've read, they are not. But I don't know. Then on the other hand, I feel like if authors aren't fortunate enough, I don't know how that works, if it's a lottery, or what, like how authors go about getting their books in the Book of the Month. But if they aren't fortunate enough to be able to get their books in there to reach a large, audience of people, because I also think a lot of the people that subscribe to the Book of the Month, I mean, like myself, are very active on socials in some kind of way, whether they have a YouTube channel, they have a lot of followers on TikTok or BookTok or Instagram. And so obviously when those people say, I read this book and it was good, it's going to travel a long way. And then the authors that don't get that opportunity, who are writing really good books and maybe in some cases better books, it's like, how do you cut through that noise? If you're not already a popular author with a following, I would imagine it's probably really hard. But yeah, I see a lot of the Book of the Month clubs on people's lists, just random people, that aren't even as connected or whatever. But anyway, back to the book. Today I'm going to be talking about one that's really popular, Our Perfect Storm. And let me look at the blurb here. You know how I like to do this now so that I'm making sure I'm following the rules and not giving away spoilers. So the little tagline here, it says, 1 week in paradise to heal a broken heart. Okay, so Frankie and George have been best friends since they were 8 years old. Both passionate, impulsive, and headstrong. They've always clashed and always come back together until now. It's the eve of Frankie's wedding weekend, and she doesn't know where they stand or even if George will show up as her best man. And then at the start of the festivities, in walks George. For one glorious evening, surrounded by her loved ones, Frankie feels her life is finally perfect. Okay? But it all comes crashing down when her fiance dumps her the next morning, leaving only a note as an explanation. Crushed and confused, Frankie returns to her family's home to wallow. But George has a different idea and a plan for healing Frankie's broken heart. He wants to go on her honeymoon. The one she was supposed to go on with her husband or her fiance that left her. But he wants to go with him. The two of them go together. And for 1 week to the lush rainforest and misty beaches of Tofino. Frankie agrees, seeing the trip for what it really is. One last chance to repair their friendship. Even if it means unearthing secrets and long-buried feelings neither knows how to handle. Even if it means falling apart for good. So, based on that, I mean, that's kind of what the story is about in a nutshell. But the thing that happened that why Frankie didn't think maybe George would show up, or she feels like their friendship needs to be repaired, is before her, like when she first told him she was engaged, right? He had met the guy that she was going to marry, and of course he didn't really think they were ever going to get married, because at the time he was just introduced as like a boyfriend, or somebody she was dating. But when he found out she had gotten engaged to him, he was just like, what? He did not have a good reaction. And I mean, obviously it was probably twofold. One, he was jealous, but another big part of it is because he really knew Frankie, and he was like, that guy's not a good match for you, and he all but tells her that, and they have a fight, and he storms off, and she hadn't talked to him. She sent him an invitation and asked him to be her best man and this and that, but like he was like radio silent, so she didn't know if he was going to show up. So he did. But so now let's bring it back. Okay, so when Frankie, when they were little, like it says 8 years old, when she met George for the first time, he had come to live with his grandmother, who lived like in a house that they thought was a witch's house, because they thought it was so scary looking, kind of overgrown grass and a big sprawling house. And that's when she first met him. She was having some stuff going on in her family, which, I'm not going to give away the main plot line of that. And she had two brothers, and, she was the only girl. So she was a little tomboy and just out there wilding in the woods and stuff. And she came across him, and they, became fast friends, because he was an only child. And, the way that the story is told, there are present and past, chapters where we get the background of their friendship and pivotal moments, and then of course the present, like from the rehearsal dinner through the aftermath, the next morning with the letter, and then how Frankie tries to pick up the pieces, and the honeymoon and all that stuff. So I really enjoyed this one. One of my favorite romance tropes is actually enemies to lovers, because I like that, the tension and how you're going to break these two people down to realize that they really, love each other. But I also enjoy the friends to lovers, and I like when, I was surprised about this one, because typically I like when they are both just oblivious, right? And then the pieces start falling together, like, oh, that's why nothing ever worked out with anybody, or that's why people say that we're too close, or whatever. It's like they're so close to each other that they can't see what the rest of the world sees. And to some degree, that's what was going on in this book. But for the most part, I mean, they both, I want to say they were maybe in their 30s, early 30s, maybe, if I can remember correctly. But they both had, had gone on with their lives. Like, he was a journalist. She had her career. They'd had several relationships with other people. They were even roommates at one time. But, as you go back to the past, and the author, gives us some insight into that, there were times that each one of them was kind of like, ooh, I think I like him. Ooh, I think I like, but no, they didn't want to mess up their friendship. And I can understand that, because if you are in a platonic relationship, opposite sex are in a platonic relationship, and it's like this person is your family, like they're like your brother, your best friend. It's like your sister, your best friend, someone who has always been there for you, who never tries to, spare your feelings in the way that they cheer you on and support you, but they can also let you know when you're not right or you're being an asshole. Having people in your life like that is very rare, because they genuinely only care about your best interest. It's not like they want to say what you want them to say, because they want you to keep liking them, or they don't want to, mess up the friendship, because they know, we've gotten into it before, and you're going to call me tomorrow. We're going to go out for sushi Friday, So when you enter into a romantic relationship, the dynamic changes, because you do become self-conscious about how you're perceived by this person, because you no longer only want their friendship, you want them to desire you, to like you, to love you. And maybe you start doing things kind of out of character to get that attention from them in that way. And I could just see how it could be awkward, because it's almost like if you were trying to get your brother, like, or your sister, you know what I mean? So But not in a weird way. But yeah, the way that the author did this one, I really enjoyed it because, for the most part, they were just themselves. And there were moments where, like, he saw her as like a woman and she saw him as a man, and they both like felt this attraction that they, it's kind of like they were like magnets, and they were like, oh, what are we doing? And then they, went their separate ways. But being in, and this is like, I guess a secondary trope, like close proximity, because they went on this honeymoon and they were sharing a room together and doing all these activities. So just, even though they had been friends all this time, over 20 years, and maybe that's what it was. Maybe they had been friends 20 years, and so maybe they were just 28. But I felt like they had already crossed over to 30. But that's a small, minute point. Yeah. So they had been around each other for like over 20 years, and ups and downs and highs and lows, and it was just second nature, their relationship. It was like, nothing that they really had to work at or try. And when they were on this trip, things, they were like, ooh, wait a minute, should we or should we not? Because that's the other thing when you have these like friends to lovers type tropes in romance books. It's never a thing where they can go back from that. Like you can't like be the best of friends your whole life and then have this moment where maybe you sleep together or something intimate happens, and then you just wake up the next day, act like nothing happened. And at one point they were going to try to do that, but it's like, once you've been with that person and it's everything you expected, it's like now your mind is cataloging the future, and you're like, we should just do this, like, and then whatever. And I think that there was a point in the book where that happened with Georgie and Frankie. And I loved how they're, how, like, you were rooting for them as friends. And so when that happens, like that natural kind of what appeared to be natural transition into them, trying to be more, like you were rooting for that too, because the chemistry was there. The chemistry was there, and this person has known you, and even when you do the stupid shit, they still like, they'll let you know you're being stupid, but I still love you, type thing. It was like, kind of in a way, a version of unconditional love. Of course, romance books wouldn't be romance books if there wasn't some misunderstanding or something for the couple to overcome. And in their case, I won't tell you what was said, but I think it's important to note, because you got to think, when this book first starts off and we're at this rehearsal dinner, Frankie and her fiance, he knew about George, and knew that was her best friend since childhood. And of course, the average man would be like, ooh, y'all are really close, am I gonna be able to stomach that? But he was a trooper about it, and he could feel that she loved him and he loved her, and it was like a cutesy little rehearsal dinner, and they were like, looked like they had chemistry, and they were dancing and drinking and having a good time at their rehearsal dinner. And I mean, there was one when George first came in, I think Frankie was just overwhelmed to see him, because she hadn't talked to him in so long after they had their fight, when she told him she was engaged. So she may have lingered on him for a minute too long, but she went back to her fiance, and like I said, the night went on and everything was good. And then, for her to wake up the next morning to this note, initially when George first showed up and she was like, oh my God, my best friend, and hugging and crying or whatever, I was thinking, oh, because I had read the blurb, obviously, I was like, oh, this is why he's gonna leave her. But when she went back to him and they were having their moment and they were so happy and talking about the future, I was like, oh, well, okay, well, did he cheat on her? Like, what? Because they seem like they're okay right now. Well, you learn later in the book, and this is after, again, George and Frankie, they spend so much time in this romantic setting, because the everything was set up for a honeymoon, right? So there's this romantic setting at this hotel and the honeymoon suite and all that. And, they start getting closer and discussing the possibilities of more and everything. Well, Frankie finds out that at her rehearsal dinner, like after she had left, because typically the rehearsal dinners are the night before the wedding. So after her rehearsal dinner, she bids adieu to her fiance because she'll see him at the altar or whatever. And she finds out that there was a conversation between George and her fiance that is the reason why he broke up with her. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. But I think that the author does a good job at, number one, not drawing it out for extremely long, like chapters. Even in the book, I mean, it was like a time lapse. It may, let's say if it was a month or two or whatever, it wasn't like we got a chapter like where this whole month was drawn out, then the next month. It was just more of her spending time with her family and them kind of affirming her and, talking about the relationship with him and, how she was feeling or whatever, before, because it's a happily ever after, and I'm gonna let you figure out then obviously what had to have happened. But the thing that I really liked about this book, to me, it was a trifecta, right? You had, the chemistry was there just as friends. And then when they started doing a little bit more, I like the open communication that, wasn't a thing where, that the characters were having all these internal dialogues and wondering if the person was going to think this or that. They would just be like, what do you think? Or what do you want? They were very open with each other. And then like, it was a lot of funny, like kind of witty banter. I love that. So to me, that's a trifecta. And then also, just the imagery of where they were, lush landscape, very vibrant, and I think a lot of the imagery kind of spoke to elements of their relationship that was the new relationship that was budding while they were there. And I feel like it was essential, to the plot and for the readers to know and understand and visualize, because I think sometimes a lot of authors, like they do too much, and it's like, we don't need to know all of that. We don't need to know it's a bird on the branch unless that sensory thing has something to do with the story. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was one thing that happened, and I feel like, I mean, it's revealed early on in the book, but I'm not gonna say what it was. But remember I said that as a child, something had happened in her family. I don't know that I liked how that was, like, I don't think it was resolved for me in the sense that we never knew why that person, I mean, we knew why they did it, but it was to me like a lame reason, I don't know. But I feel like that singular incident in her childhood, it affected her relationships with people and her thinking that people would leave her, like, and maybe she didn't really believe that she was worthy enough for somebody to stay. Okay. And I don't want to say too much more than that, but it was a really good book. It was a feel-good book. It flowed very well. You were invested in the story. You were rooting for the characters. And I think I read this one in a day. Like started early in the morning and just throughout the day had other stuff going on, but kept coming back to it. And by later that night, I had finished it. It was, it was really good. And this one came out in May, Our Perfect Storm. And I think that when I looked, like, I went down kind of like a rabbit hole, just like looking at some of her other books, like trying to see, had I ever read her before? A lot of her covers are the same. That's interesting. Like the same font. It's always a beach or lake scene. It's really interesting. And oh, they did. I was like, I don't remember them surfing, but they did. They took surfing lessons. So that's kind of what this, on the honeymoon. So that's what that picture alludes to. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Oh, and I was gonna like look through here before I signed off to see if there was anything like from the flag pages that I could share or that I wanted to share or whatever. And the first thing that I came to was something I had forgot about. Now, I don't know how you think you're going to have a real successful relationship with somebody else when, let me read this to you. I was the person George called the night he thought he was going to die. He had been out on a, like, he was a journalist and he went into crazy places, and like he had called her on the phone or whatever. But this is the line right here. I have his name tattooed on my rib cage, just like mine is tattooed on his. So you telling me that somebody will be okay? Because it will be different if, like, you just had an initial. You can say that's anything. Or if it was like a unisex name, whatever. But you're a woman, and on your, well, I guess hers is unisex because her name's Frankie. But on her rib cage, she has a man's name, George. And then on his, he has Frankie. And especially if you're with somebody and then they end up meeting this person, because they're like, BFF. So I'm sure at some point in their lives, their significant others met, them or whatever. And I just thought that was wild. Getting your name tattooed on, like your best friend's name tattooed on your body, even if, like, let's say if y'all were both into Star Wars, right? And your favorite character was Darth Vader, or if both of y'all got like lightsabers tattooed, and then you knew that was a friendship thing, like, oh, I got a lightsaber, on the right, and she got a lightsaber on the left. That's just very, inconspicuous. That's very like, oh, I just like Star Wars. But somebody's name? That's like lifetime. That's commitment, unless you get it covered up. So I think that in itself kind of spoke to just how close they were, getting tattoos of each other's names. But yeah, if you like, number one, romance stories, if you like the friends to lovers trope, if you like close proximity, if you like all of those things, they're all in here. So I think that, this will be a book that you would gravitate towards. But it's just a really feel good, beautifully written love story, at the end of the day. So if you've read Our Perfect Storm, I would love to know your thoughts on it. Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure that you like this video. And if you have not taken the opportunity to do so already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you next week. Bye.